There are a few graphic and distressing details that are revealed at the end of this story. Viewer discretion is advised. On the morning of February 2nd, 2012, a young man took an exit off a busy 4-lane highway in Anchorage, Alaska, towards a large, snowy parking lot. He drove past several parked cars until he reached a small, bright teal shack. This was the Common Grounds, a well-loved coffee shop where he worked as a barista. After parking his car, he made his way to the white employee entrance. He pulled out his key, ready to unlock the door. But when he turned the key, he discovered that the door was already ajar. He remembered the girl who worked the previous night and realized she was supposed to have locked up. Samantha Koenig was just 18 years old, and though she had only been working for about a month, she appeared to be quite responsible and had never encountered any problems when closing up before. The young man dismissed it, thinking that everyone makes mistakes, and walked inside. As soon as he entered, he spotted a woman in a white car. Almost immediately, he felt like something about the situation seemed a bit off. Samantha must have left her shift in a hurry, as the place was a mess. Napkins were strewn across the floor, towels were left out, and cups were still on the counters. As this young man approached the cash register, he couldn't help but think about how careless Samantha had been. When he reached for his register key, he discovered that, like the door, the cash register was already unlocked. As he pulled out the tray, his heart sank. There was no money inside. In that moment, he realized they had been robbed. He quickly called his boss. Just the night before, Samantha had asked her boyfriend, Dwayne, to come pick her up after her shift at Common Grounds. Dwayne pulled up to the kiosk around 8:30 p.m., a full 30 minutes after her shift was supposed to end. He had been delayed at work, which explained his lateness. As he stepped out of his truck and surveyed the parking lot, he noticed that Samantha was nowhere to be found. The coffee shop was completely dark, signaling that it had been closed for the night. Feeling the chill of the frigid air, Dwayne approached the coffee shop's window and pressed his face against the glass, peering inside, but saw no one there. His mind drifted back to the heated text exchange he had with Samantha earlier in the evening. She had accused him of cheating, and he had responded with a dismissive attitude, which only escalated into a bitter argument. As Dwayne heads back to his truck, he's pondering whether Samantha might be avoiding him after their argument. He thinks maybe she got a ride home from her dad or a friend, which explains her absence. Once inside his truck, he shoots her a text to check if she's okay and if she made it home. After waiting for several minutes without a reply, Dwayne realizes that despite their fight, he really cares about her. So he decides he needs to swing by her place to make sure she's there and doing all right. A few minutes later, he arrives at her house and knocks on the door. Her single father, James, answers. Dwayne explains that he didn't see Samantha after her shift and wanted to check if she was home. But James replies, "She's not here. I haven't heard from her." They both head into the kitchen, sit down, and begin texting and calling Samantha to figure out her whereabouts. A couple of minutes later, Dwayne's phone buzzes with a text from Samantha. The message clearly shows she's still upset with him, saying she needs some time to think and will be with some friends for a few days. She asks him to let her father know where she is. Dwayne shows James the message, and as he reads it, James thinks to himself, "This is quite unfortunate. It's not like Samantha to act this way." He had been raising her since she was 2, and they were really close, sharing everything. It just didn't make sense that she wouldn't reach out to let him know she'd be out with friends for a couple of days. Ignoring all his calls and texts while he was clearly worried, that was out of character for her. The two men stayed up late, calling and texting, hoping to hear from Samantha, but she never replied. By the next morning, still no word from her, so James went to the Anchorage Police Department to file a missing person report for his only daughter. After he reported her missing, an officer contacted the owner of the Common Grounds coffee shop to inquire about Samantha. The owner mentioned they had just received a call from their barista who was working at the kiosk that morning, reporting that there had been a robbery, and they hadn't been able to get in touch with Samantha since. Nobody knows her whereabouts. The owner informed the police officer that as soon as she arrived at the coffee shop, she would send the security footage from the previous night to the police department. While the officers awaited this footage, some of them started reaching out to Samantha's friends and family to check if they had any idea about her location. But unfortunately, no one had heard from her and had no information to share. A few other police officers made their way to the Common Grounds coffee kiosk to check things out for themselves. Upon arrival, they found no evidence of a struggle either outside or inside the kiosk. Inside, they discovered a panic button under the counter that hadn't been activated. While Samantha was absent from the kiosk, the police operated under the assumption that she had robbed the place and left voluntarily, despite her father finding her last text message concerning. What puzzled the police was how Samantha had actually managed to leave the coffee shop. She didn't have a car that night and couldn't have simply walked away because the weather was too harsh and cold, making Anchorage quite unwalkable. So if Samantha's claim about wanting a few days to herself with friends at the coffee shop was true, she wouldn't have been in the kiosk. If that were the case, it raised an important question. Why didn't any of her friends know where she was? This question was answered later that day when the coffee shop owner released the security footage. The footage, which had no audio, began recording around 8 p.m. on February 1st, 2012, the night Samantha disappeared. It showed her inside the kiosk, working alone, cheerful, and busy. At one point, an unseen individual approached the window to place an order. Samantha turned to take their drink order, then began preparing the drink. Once finished, she turned to hand it to the person. But the situation suddenly changed. She stepped back, raised her arms in surprise, and moments later she turned off the kiosk lights. Then, she got down on her knees with her back to the window, remaining still and silent for about a minute before slowly getting up and walking toward the cash register. She opens the cash register, pulls out some money, and heads back to the window, seemingly handing it to a shadowy figure outside. Then, Samantha turns and kneels with her back to the window. 2 minutes pass before this person leans their upper body inside the coffee shop, reaching down to tie Samantha's hands. The dim lighting in the kiosk makes the footage grainy, obscuring the figure's identity, though it's clear he's a man in a large sweatshirt and a hat pulled down low over his face. Once he finishes tying her hands, he jumps through the window, shuts it behind him, and forces Samantha to stand. He pushes a gun against her back and marches her out through the employee door. They cross the lot to a white pickup truck, where he puts her inside before driving away. In the following days, both the police and the FBI hit dead ends in their investigation due to a lack of evidence, relying only on the unclear surveillance footage that failed to provide any leads on Samantha's abductor. Meanwhile, Samantha's father, James, rallied nearly all 300,000 residents of Anchorage to search for his daughter. His determination attracted major news coverage nationwide, bringing Samantha's story to the forefront. This sparked generous donations from strangers to establish a reward for information about her whereabouts. However, despite the growing reward and increased media attention, no one stepped forward with leads that could advance the case. Samantha didn't contact Dwayne or her father after she went missing. Then, on February 24th, 3 weeks later, Dwayne received a text from Samantha's phone. The message instructed him to go to a specific sign in a nearby public park. Dwayne and his friend James reviewed the message and promptly shared it with the police. They hurried to the park and actually arrived about 15 minutes before the police did. Once inside the park, Dwayne and James entered through the gates and followed the main path until they reached the sign. It turned out to be a bulletin board, and attached to it was a Ziploc bag containing a typed ransom note. The note included a black and white photo of Samantha that appeared to show her in a dazed state, with a blank expression and not really looking at the camera. In the picture, a man was holding a copy of the Anchorage Daily News, dated February 13th, 2012. This served as evidence that Samantha was alive as of that date. While the situation was still dire, it provided some relief to everyone involved, including Samantha's father, to know that she was alive as of last week. The ransom note demanded that James deposit $30,000 into his daughter's account immediately, with the promise that she would be released 6 months later. Following the FBI's advice, James deposited part of the ransom into the account, and the FBI monitored the situation. They planned to track any withdrawals made from the account. A few days later, they detected 3 separate withdrawals in Anchorage. Each time, when the FBI rushed to the scene, the individual making the withdrawals had already vanished. Security footage from the ATMs revealed that the person making the withdrawals was a man wearing a ski mask and large sunglasses. They had no means to identify him at first. After the series of withdrawals, the account went quiet for more than a week, and during that time, Samantha was unresponsive. On March 7th, however, more withdrawals occurred. This time in Arizona, then New Mexico, and finally Texas. Authorities attempted to reach the ATMs, but they always arrived just after the masked man in sunglasses had left. This time, there was a breakthrough. In the surveillance footage from one of the Texas ATMs, they captured the car the suspect was getting into as he drove away. It was a compact sedan, a white Ford Focus, and they saw him heading east on a Texas highway. Authorities in Texas were alerted to keep an eye out for this specific vehicle in the area. On March 13th, a Texas patrol officer spotted the car parked in a hotel lot. He waited nearby until a man in his 30s exited one of the hotel rooms, walked down, and got into the car. The patrolman then followed him, looking for any reason to make a stop.
As he monitored the man with his radar gun, he noticed the driver was going just 2 miles per hour over the speed limit, providing the perfect opportunity to pull him over. The patrolman approached the driver's side of the vehicle, noting that the window was already down. The man appeared calm as the officer requested his license. In response, he handed over an Alaskan driver's license. His name was Israel Keys, and he was 34 years old, living in Anchorage. The patrolman recognized him immediately and called for backup. Before long, they were combing through Keys's car. In the trunk, they discovered a ski mask and clothing that matched the description of someone making withdrawals from various ATMs. They also found a gun, along with Samantha's cell phone and debit card. After Keys was arrested and taken into custody, he denied any involvement in Samantha's disappearance. However, when faced with overwhelming evidence, he agreed to share the full story of what happened, but only if they provided him with an Americano coffee, a peanut butter Snickers bar, and a cigar. Once he had these items, he began to speak, revealing details so disturbing and graphic that the FBI has yet to release the complete transcript of his confession. What is known from public records is this. On February 1st, 2012, Keys planned to rob the Common Grounds coffee kiosk. When he approached the window, he found Samantha serving there. He ordered an Americano, and as she turned to prepare his drink, his plan shifted. He decided he wouldn't just steal money from the coffee shop, he would take Samantha as well. When she handed him the drink, he discreetly pulled out his gun, aimed it at her, and announced it was a robbery. Samantha backed up, raising her hands in surrender. Keys then tied her hands, jumped back inside, and after shutting the window, stuffed napkins into her mouth to silence her. He repeatedly muttered, "I don't know," so she wouldn't be able to make any sound. He then forced her outside to his car, and they drove away. Once inside the vehicle, he removed the napkins and warned her that if she attempted to escape or call for help, he would kill her. He mentioned that she was quite compliant. It was clear she was terrified, but she was doing her best to remain calm. At one point, Keys reached over and took her phone, sending a message to her boyfriend, telling him she would be with friends for a few days and that he should inform her father. Then Keys told Samantha that he would be holding her for ransom. She replied that her family was very poor and that he wouldn't get much money from them. Keys reassured her, saying not to worry, as he was sure they would find a way to gather the funds. They drove around Anchorage for several hours, making stops for Samantha to use the restroom and for Keys to smoke a cigar. Around midnight, he returned to his house, pulled into the driveway, and instructed Samantha to lie down in the back seat. After covering her with tarps, he warned her that if she tried to escape, he would kill her. Then, he went inside his house, where his 10-year-old daughter and girlfriend were asleep. In just a few hours, he and his daughter were set to leave for a 2-week luxury cruise in New Orleans. Once back at the car, Keys blindfolded Samantha and led her down the driveway to his shed. Inside, he made her sit on an upturned bucket and tied a rope around her neck, anchoring both ends to the wall to secure her. To drown out any noise she might make, he blasted the radio and repeatedly reminded her that making noise would lead to her death. Overall, she was compliant. Keys then gave her a couple of cigarettes and told her to relax, assuring her that he would get the ransom money from her family and that once that was taken care of, she would be released. He turned on a few space heaters to warm up the area before locking the door behind him. Once back inside his house, he checked to ensure that his daughter and girlfriend were still asleep. Thankfully, they were. He poured himself a glass of wine and relaxed for a bit. After a while, he filled a cup with water and headed back to the shed. Inside, he handed the water to Samantha. She maintained a composed demeanor, though fear was evident in her eyes. "Did you talk to my father? Did you sort out the ransom?" she asked. He reassured her that he had indeed spoken to her father, and that everything was proceeding as planned. Her father was raising the money, and soon she would be free. Then, he approached her. unscrewed the anchors holding a rope against her throat, and cut the zip ties on her wrists, allowing her a moment of ease. Relief washed over Samantha. Her nightmare seemed to be nearing its end. But seconds later, he abruptly grabbed her and retied her, this time with even more intensity and precision. It was a cruel trick. By releasing her briefly, he sought to see how she would react under the false impression of freedom. In reality, he never intended to let her go. There was no ransom, and he hadn't spoken to her father. It was all a deception. Keyes later recounted to investigators that as he secured her restraints for the second time, he noted a look of total resignation on her face. She understood what was coming for her. After finishing with the ties, he exited the shed and locked the door again. He went back inside to ensure his daughter and girlfriend remained asleep, which they did before returning to the shed. This time, as he stepped in, the air was thick with the stench of urine and sweat. He turned to find Samantha, visibly terrified. He moved closer and began to assault her. Once he was done, he stood over her, putting his clothes back on. With a stoic expression, Samantha looked up and asked, "Are you going to kill me?" He simply replied, "Yes, I am." As he slipped on his leather gloves, she desperately tried to reason with him, but he insisted there was no other way. Keyes would later express his admiration for Samantha's bravery during those harrowing moments. Shortly before 4 a.m., Keyes drove a knife into Samantha's back before choking her until she stopped moving. He told investigators that she never made a sound. Keyes shut the shed behind him and walked out when she was dead. He entered his home. He showered. He then awoke his daughter and instructed her to get preparing since they were heading off shortly for the airport. Keyes returned to the shed while his daughter was getting ready. He entered. He wrapped Samantha's body in a tarp and shoved her in the direction of the rear. He shut off the lights, disconnected the space heaters, and switched off the music, after which they went back inside the house and double-locked the shed to make brunch with his daughter. At 5 a.m., Habs arrived at the house and Keyes and his daughter hopped in. They headed to the airport for their 2-week vacation in New Orleans. When they returned, Keyes went to his shed. He unwrapped Samantha from her tarp, and in his view, she still appeared quite lively. He dressed her in new clothes, applied a lot of makeup, braided her hair, and stitched her eyelids open to make her look alert. Then, he held up a copy of the Anchorage Daily News next to her and took several photos to create a proof-of-life picture for the ransom note. After taking those pictures, he dismembered her and discarded her in a nearby frozen lake. It later emerged that Samantha was not the first victim of Israel Keyes. In fact, he was a serial killer who specifically targeted random individuals because he derived pleasure from witnessing their deaths. Over the years, he buried what he termed kill kits across the United States. These contained weapons and equipment intended for capturing and killing people. This way, no matter where he found himself, he could easily dig up a kit whenever he felt the compulsion to kill and select a random victim. He had no preference for age, size, gender, or whether someone was alone or with a group. Anyone was a potential target. Keyes confessed to investigators that the moment he spotted Samantha in that coffee kiosk, he instantly decided he was going to murder her. Everything about the ransom, the robbery, it was all just a facade meant to control her, to give her a glimmer of hope that she might survive. But the truth is, the moment she stepped out of that kiosk, she was as good as gone. Keyes confessed to murdering Samantha and an elderly couple in Vermont, but he took his own life in his jail cell in December 2012 before revealing any other victims. To this day, the total number of his victims remains a mystery. The best estimate stands at 11, based on a drawing he created while incarcerated.